Thank you all for being here. I greatly appreciate it. I am John Taylor, and the title of my lecture is The Art of Making a Difference, Theater and Social Change. Suit the action to the word to the action with this special observance. Overstep not the modesty of nature, for anything so overdone is from the purpose of playing, whose end both at first and now was and is to hold as twere the mirror up to nature. Of course, this is Shakespeare's words through the voice of Hamlet, through the character of Hamlet, as he addresses the players in the play Hamlet. And in these words, Hamlet likens the theater to a mirror which reflects life as it is. The idea of theater as a mirror is both a philosophical and an artistic perspective, which has greatly defined how we understand and how we view theater. I mean, think about it. We use such words as authentic and honest and truthful to describe performances that we believe are good. I mean, certainly in terms of acting training, the standard for today's actor is how honest and believable and truthful you can be in the imaginary circumstances of the play. But a mirror can only show what is. I agree with playwright Laurie Gunderson when she argues, here's the thing. Theater should lead culture and follow it. If the theater we are making today solely reflects society, then we are failing it. We are not a mirror, we are a lens. We see what's coming, we embody it, we catalyze it, and we make the better future happen because we tell the story first, or at least we should. Now, I like Gunderson's idea of the stage as a lens through which we can examine and look at issues. But I argue we can go beyond that we can go beyond the lens of the stage, and instead that we should view the stage as an open frame. I argue that in that open frame, it is a place where there are no limitations and anything is possible. As an open frame, the stage can be a vehicle for change, and it can offer unlimited possibilities. In the open or empty frame, as scholar Jill Dolan calls it, we can create the world not as it is, but as we want it to be. In doing so, we can begin to make the imaginary world of the theater a reality in everyday life. The stage, I believe, and will argue tonight, should be at the forefront of efforts to examine our personal beliefs and the major societal issues of the day. It can be a place where injustice, ignorance, and prejudice are exposed and new understandings of the human experience explored. Most importantly, it can be a place where a multiplicity of voices can be heard in discourse. On a fundamental level, I believe that art matters and that the stage can have a real and lasting impact. Now, theater in and of itself is not social change, but it can be a catalyst for social justice and community engagement. By a show of hands, how many of you have ever been moved by a play or a dance you've seen? Everybody, right? A book you've read, a piece of art that you've viewed, or music that you've heard. Of course, right? Of course. I believe that when an audience member steps into a space like this, into a theater, or into our main stage space, that it is a real moment of possibility and opportunity for change to occur. I mean, think about what happens. That individual arrives in the theater, takes their seat in their chair. They come in with a set of beliefs, world values, and perspectives, and then they have an opportunity when they watch a performance to see the world through somebody else's eyes, to experience things they may have never experienced, to see stories they may have never heard before. And in doing so, there is a moment of possibility when, for some people, and I think of the stage play we're doing now, Standing on Ceremony, the gay marriage plays, that for some people coming into the theater, they're going to see characters, relationships, stories, and perspectives that maybe they have never considered before. And in that moment, there is a possibility of transformation. Because what you ultimately have to do is say, here is what I believe. This is what I know. This is my truth. But then what I see on stage happen, and say, well, this is not how I understand the world. This is not what I believe, and I'm not sure how I feel about this, but what I've seen has changed me in some ways. And in those moments, an audience member has a real choice to make. Do they put their blinders on? Do they leave the theater at the end of the evening saying, okay, I know what I believe, I'm firm in that belief, and life goes on? Or do they say, I know what I believe, or at least I thought I knew what I believed. I thought I knew what was the truth. But now I've seen something that's made me reconsider what I believe. And now I've got to negotiate. I've got to negotiate. The contradictions I've seen on stage with my own beliefs opens up an open stage, an open frame of possibility for transformation. That's when theater works at its best. I think ultimately life is like that, right? That's certainly what education should be about, that we come into a classroom, we come into a university knowing this is what I know through my 18, 19, 20 years of life, but I'm going to be exposed to a whole lot of new things. And at some point I've got to negotiate what it is that I've learned and what it is that I know and reconcile the two together. It's a moment of opportunity. If art can transform us on a personal level, then surely it can transform us on a societal level. For me, the moment of transformation had something to do with this. The moment I realized that theater could be more than I ever thought really occurred completely by accident. And those are often the best moments when that can happen. So, already in love with theater and acting since the age of 5, I thought I knew what theater was all about. But that changed, and it was completely by accident. I got home one night when I was 16 years old from a high school party. It was late at night on a Friday. Everyone was in bed, sleeping at home. I turned on cable television. Cable was really new at this point. It was very exciting. And of course, as a 16-year-old boy, I had one target station. I turned to Cinemax. Known affectionately to my friends and I as Skinomax. And so I was hoping to find whatever was going to be on, right? And I was surprised because I happened on a showing of Luis Valdez's Zoot. Now, as I said earlier, tuning into Cinemax late at night for a 16-year-old boy to watch a film version of a stage play was not typically why you watch Cinemax. But I recognized the actress Tyne Daly, and I watched. This intrigued me. I thought, well, I'll see what happens. And what I saw, even though in the medium of film, transformed my beliefs and ideas of what theater could be. From its stylized staging to its potent mix of pathos and politics, I witnessed the power of theater to entertain and to be a transforming force. And it changed forever how I think about what it is that I study and do. Now, it's a fair question to ask. Why can't it just be entertainment? Why can't I just come to the theater, sit in my chair, have a few laughs, maybe listen to a few songs, and go on my merry way and not be burdened by the issues of society? Theater should and can be that. Of course it can and should be that. For myself, though, I knew early on that if I was going to dedicate my life to doing this, in the educational field, in the creation of theater, for myself, I knew I needed it to be more. I knew I needed it to be more. So when we talk about theater and social action, we are talking about theater as an act of transgression. As an act of transgression. To transgress means we're going to break a rule or law to go beyond a limitation. This is a photo of what was there. That's fine. That was a photo of Will Act for Change, our theater and social change group on campus. Now, we're not talking about the majority of American theater, but we're talking about a surprisingly high number of theaters that are devoted to social change as part of their mission. So there are approximately, in today's professional theater, around 200 companies nationwide that have as their sole mission community-based or social change action. This represents about 15 to 20% of all professional, not-for-profit theaters in the United States. Now, remember that many professional theater companies have outreach, educational programming as part of their everyday mission. But there are specific companies that are devoted solely to the idea of social change as their mission. We have the Living Theater, we have the San Francisco Mime Troupe, and El Teatro Campesino, which is celebrating its 50th year of existence this year, right? Some of you may remember in 2007 when we had Luis Valdez here. He is no longer running the company, his son is, but their mission while creating professional theater is still towards social change and activist theater. At Adams State University, we try to create a variety of programming in our season. And if you come to our shows, you know that we do everything from the classics to contemporary theater. We have an incredible comic improv troupe, and we also have social change. And we do a lot of other things in between. In that process, one of the things that we try to impart to our students as part of the ethos of our program is that whether it's here when you're a student or whatever community you end up living in, we want you to be an active part of that community. And one of the questions we ask of you as our students to ask yourself is, how are you going to use your degree to change your part of the world? How are you going to use that degree to change your part of the world? And there are so many ways of doing that. It's not just social change theater, but being an active part of a member of a community is part of being a citizen. And we argue it's also part of being a theater artist. And so over the years, we've done a number of projects. In 2006, we did the Dead Man Walking Project as part of a national project, working with Sister Helen Prejean and Tim Robbins. We did in 2008 the Fahrenheit 451 project, in which we devoted 8 months of looking at issues of censorship and freedom of expression. A few years later, the RNJ project looked at issues of reconciliation and how we deal with people who have done us harm. And we explored different ways in society and through religion that people deal with reconciliation and forgiveness. And I teach every 2 years a theater and social change class. There's a theater company within that called Will Act for Change. We've done several years of scenes from banned theater, censored theater, challenging ourselves to take on the very works that throughout time have been censored, or maybe even works that we say, oh no, we can't do them here because we're out of state, we're in a small rural area, people will freak out if we do this, we'll freak out if we do this, but we take on many of those things. The company took on 8 the Play, which was a stage reading as part of a national project dealing with Prop 8, and it was a docudrama that looked at the federal court case that overturned that law. So since 2006, we've done 7 projects, 4 of them national projects. I'm proud of that record because we are a small liberal arts university, right? We are in a rural area. We are in an area where sometimes we wonder whether what we are doing will be well received. But we do it anyway because that's the nature of the work. Now, one of the misconceptions, and of course, before I forget, we have the Standing Strong Day. So we're in the middle of this project right now. There are still events coming up tomorrow at 12:15. If you're on campus, I hope you'll join us for an ice cream social right in the front of Richardson in the front lawn. If you have a t-shirt or a shirt in one of the colors of the rainbow, wear it, because we're going to do a group photo of as many people as we can gather, not only for ice cream, but for the photo showing that we stand strong for equality. On Friday night, my colleague, Professor Nielsen, she and her Lost and Found comedy improv troupe is going to do, at 10 o'clock at night in this space, an improv comedy show dealing with issues of equality, celebrating equality with laughter. On Saturday morning, we'll gather about 9 o'clock on the pre-parade route for the homecoming parade. Again, wearing colors in the rainbow, in the colors of the rainbow, wearing shirts in the color of the rainbow. We're going to gather and we're going to have as many people walking in that parade route that are standing strong for equality. I hope that it is. My dream is, we'll see if it happens, is that we are the biggest contingent in that parade. That would be pretty awesome. And of course, our play production runs Thursday night, Friday, and Saturday. Please call if you haven't seen it to get tickets and come and see it. Now, one of the misconceptions about theater and social change is that it is social work with a little theater thrown in, right? It's social justice and activism with not much art, just a little bit of art. But I tell my students that we will set high standards for ourselves and our work as theater artists. We will practice theater in its fullest sense, but do so in ways that will challenge them, my students, to expand their view of theater, what it does, and what it can look like, and the reasons why we do it. And this is one of the reasons that I do these projects. Not only are there issues that I think need to address that are relevant in the moment now, but I desperately want my students to understand that there are so many ways of doing what we do in theater. And you need to find what it is that you do well and what it is that drives you. What is your passion? What is the reason why you say, I can't do theater unless I'm doing it for this reason? But it might be this, right? So I want you to have those experiences. And in turn, I tell them they will challenge their audience. They will challenge their audience to be actively involved in the world around them by practicing acts of social justice. And in the process of creating social change theater, our work won't always be about how many tickets we sell, but it will be, more importantly, about how many lives we can impact. And at the end of the day, I want them to be able to claim, I used my education to change my part of the world. As Brazilian theater artist Augusto Ball, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, said once, education is transitive, or it isn't education. So with this work and our lives in general, I think we must each ask ourselves some basic questions. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Now, I often talk about theater and acting specifically as a sharing of energy. It's a sharing of energy between actors on stage. It's a sharing of energy between actors and audience. And a basic question actors have to ask themselves is, how do I choose to share my energy? And by energy, I'm not being all new agey. I'm really talking about the best of yourself, right? How do I choose to share the best of myself, or myself? Do you choose to give the best of yourself openly and freely to those around you, knowing that the more you give others, the more you're going to get back from them, and the better you're going to be, the better actor you're going to be? Or do you choose to conserve and say, well, I'm not going to engage fully because the more I give of myself, the less I'll have for myself. It's just too exhausting. If I put myself out there, there's the chance of rejection, or what I'm doing is not going to be well received, and you just hold back. And of course, the third way, I guess, is to choose to share the worst of yourself. But I think as theater professionals, how you choose to ask that question, how you choose to answer that question, how will I share my energy? The best of myself, I'll pull back, or I'll give the worst of myself, will determine the kind of career you have. And to a large degree, in life, how you choose to answer that question will determine the kind of life you lead. In an essay, playwright Naomi Wallace asked theater artists to consider, what is our relationship to the status quo? She says, what is our relationship to the status quo? The powers that be and were, to commonly held assumptions and stereotypes? Is it a relationship of confirmation or challenge? Are we polishers, or are we pains in the ass? And to be a pain in the ass, she says, I think is a noble enterprise. And I agree. Theater becomes an act of transgression when it challenges the status quo, and in doing so creates a space for transformation. And here's the simple fact. If The fact is, if any theater isn't trying to destabilize the status quo, it is reinforcing the status quo. So with social change theater, we will try to pursue a theater that, in Wallace's words, quote, clarifies rather than concludes, that resists rather than conforms. I am inspired by Wallace's word when she urges us, let us transgress together, and by this heat, by the sparks that are generated, make a light to see by for all of us. In theater and social change work, we don't have to all agree on the politics of it, but we do have to be committed to the idea of transforming our community through performance. In social change circles, there is a well-known story, which I'll share with you briefly here, called Babies in the River. And some of you may have heard this story. I heard it a few years ago when I was at a workshop learning Boal technique in Portland, Oregon. And so the basic story is this. A guy is walking down by the riverbank in a small town. And he looks out at the river and then he sees something and it shocks him. And there's this baby in a basket floating down the river. Now the baby's safe, but the baby shouldn't be in a basket floating down the river by itself. And so he sees that and he rushes into the river and pulls the baby in the basket out and sets the baby down on the shore, wipes his head and thinks, wow, man, how did that happen? And then no sooner, he looks again and there's another baby in a basket coming down the river. So he runs out and rescues that baby and brings it back. And no sooner does he get back, there's a baby coming down. So he runs out there, and so he's thinking, this is going to keep happening, so he calls for help. And soon, through his yells and cries for help, people come, and then there are just babies in baskets coming down the river, and the people join him, and they form an assembly line, really, of grabbing these babies and putting them on the shore, and the babies keep coming, and more people come and help. And then at one moment, a woman leaves the river and starts walking upstream. And the man stops her, where are you going? We need your help. And she says, I'm going to go upstream and find out who is putting the babies in the river and stop them from doing that. Now that is social action. We're doing good by taking the babies out of the water, but we're not changing the situation. And that ultimately is what social change theater is all about. It is trying to change the dynamics of the situation. It's trying to start action. Remember, theater isn't social change in and of itself, but it creates, it activates, and it creates the catalyst for change. Professor Harry Elam defines social protest performances as those that have an explicit social purpose that direct their audience to social action. Just like the woman leaving to go up to the stream, go upstream to get the person to stop, was creating social action. Now, as part of this, any kind of effective social change theater has to have two elements to make it effective. The first is urgency. Urgency. Professor Elam defines urgency as the idea that the frustrations of the disenfranchised have reached crisis proportions. Untenable circumstances have pushed oppressed people to the boiling point, and they erupt. No longer willing to endure their subjugation, experiencing the pressures of urgency, the oppressed demand immediate reform. I really do think that's what was happening to a large degree with the marriage equality issue that our project, that Standing Strong, the ASU Equality Project, addresses. That really, since the 2004 election, when politicians purposely ran on this as an issue, not for equality, but to get state constitutional amendments passed to help them get elected to office, but impacting the lives of thousands and thousands of Americans, putting in constitutional law segregationist policies. And so since that period, there's been momentum moving towards the idea of marriage equality as a reality in our country. And by the time we get to the Supreme Court accepting the case, by the time they rule in June, there is a sense of urgency that this has to happen now, today. We can't wait 5 years. We can't wait 10 years. We're not going to put this off any longer. I said when I chose this play project to do that it would either be a celebration or it would be a call to further activism. It's a celebration. But can you imagine what would have happened if the court had ruled differently on that day? Not only the disappointment, but the sense of greater urgency that we can't let this stand, that we have to have change. I worried that after the court ruling, I didn't worry that much about it, but I thought about, will this play still be, and this project still be timely? Or have we got the ruling, we've had the celebration. I thought, the issue is still relevant, and there's still a sense of urgency. Because until we get to that point where people across the nation actually accept the ruling of the court, then this fight isn't over. The struggle isn't over. As long as there are presidential candidates saying, well, the Supreme Court is just, there are 5 people who rule, they're just lawyers. Who are they to say to make law for this nation? Which, it's problematic right there. And until people say, this is our society, and we accept it, there is still that sense of urgency. And I think that's a major part of this battle. The other concept besides urgency is efficacy. Efficacy. There has to be the belief in social change action, including theater, that our actions can be successful, that we can actually create change with our efforts. Urgency and efficacy. Now, I want to talk about 2 figures, and then after we talk about the second one, I'm going to ask if you'll get involved and help me a little bit up here. I'm going to ask for some volunteers, and we're going to practice some social change theater. So the 2 individuals we're going to talk about, they are Bertolt Brecht and Augusto Boal. So who is Brecht, and why is he the most influential theater artist of the 20th century? Well, I think if you were to compose a list of the top 5 theater artists in the 20th century, Brecht would certainly be on that list. Probably number 1. I tell my theater students partly to be theatrical, because this is theater, and partly to be provocative. In 2,000 plus years of theater history, there is Aristotle, and there is Brecht. Right? Now, people will disagree with that, but that's okay. But the reason that I say that is this, is that for 2,000 plus years, Aristotle establishes, without ever being an artist himself, the rules by which many people held the standard for which great art must fit those rules. He established the rules for what makes great art, and for centuries people tried to live up to those standards, right? And if you've read Aristotle, as probably many of you have, many of his writings are problematic, right? If you're not in a narrow set definition of what is normal, beautiful, and male, then Aristotle is problematic for you. But then Brecht comes along in the 20th century, and he tries to create, really for the first time, an alternative to Aristotelian theater. So who is Brecht? He was born in the last years of the 19th century in Germany. He witnessed the horrors of the First World War, the rise of fascism in Nazi Germany, and the destruction of World War II. As children of the new age, of the 20th century, the new scientific age, Brecht argued that we needed a new way of seeing and understanding of our world so that we might change it. Now, remember we talked about the mirror at the beginning, Shakespeare's quote, "Hold the mirror up as to nature, show life as it is." Here's Brecht's take on the mirror. Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. A very different perspective, a perspective of a social change agent. So, what did Brecht want to do? Well, we're just going to briefly summarize this, okay? So Brecht was experimenting with how you tell a story to an audience, or how you show a story to an audience in performance. And his goal was to create that space. I use the term an open frame, open space. A space for critical consciousness. So in Brecks Theatre, a production was created and performed with the idea as to discourage a passive response by the audience. So what's a passive response by the audience? So the audience comes into our theater, they sit in their comfortable chair, the air conditioning is on, it feels good, the lights go down, and you watch the performance, and you applaud politely at the end of Act 1, and you applaud politely at the end of Act 2, then you go home and go about your life, right? It's a pretty passive experience. Brecht wanted to do something else besides that with his audience. He wanted to discourage that. He wanted to activate his audience. He wanted to encourage them to be active participants, watch critically what they're seeing, and then ultimately apply what they see in the performance to the world outside. But to do that, he had to figure out, how do we avoid what Aristotle really wanted, which was to draw the audience in to the emotions and the passions of the action and get caught up in the story, so much so that you believe the reality of the story, you believe the stories of the lives. And so we're so focused on the emotions of the characters and how we feel about it. Will the two lovers get together? Will the character die? Will the character live? Whatever the circumstances are. That we're not really critically thinking about why things are happening. So last December I directed It's a Wonderful Life, right? So it is truly, I mean, it's a Aristotelian theater. We're going to get you caught up in the emotions of George Bailey's life, and you're rooting for him. A Brechtian perspective would have been, why is he in that position, right? Why do we have such disparity of wealth so that one man in that town can rule that town with an iron fist, and who has success, who doesn't, is determined. Why aren't we questioning the way society works? Brecks Theatre is designed to create that. In the big picture, what he's really trying to do is redefine the relationship between spectator, theater, and society. Here's a quote. "Theater is a form of knowledge. It should and can be a means of transforming society. Theater can help build our future rather than just us waiting for it." Those are the words of this guy, Augusto Boal, who created a kind of theater known as theater of the oppressed. I actually got to meet this guy a few years ago at a conference in Denver. My wife and I were walking through the lobby, and I do a double take, and I said, I think that's Augusto Boal standing there, and sure enough it was. He was there to address the conference. So who is Boal? And then we're going to practice some of what he taught. So taking up Brecht's challenge to create performance that empowered spectators to take action, Boal created an approach to performance that's designed for people who want to learn ways of fighting back against oppression in their daily lives and in society. Now, he has a really interesting story. So he's a Brazilian theater artist, or was. He passed away a couple of years ago. So in the mid-'60s, when Brazil was going through a series of dictatorships, as a theater artist, his calling was to try to change his society. And so in doing his theater, it was a mix of politics and performance. He would do his theater in factories, on the street, in union halls, in school buildings, in the slums of Rio de Janeiro, where the forgotten people were living, right? By 1971, his work had drawn the attention of the dictators, and they imprisoned him. So for 4 months, he was beaten and tortured because of his work as a theater artist. And then he was finally released, and he was exiled from 71 to about 1986, when he was able to come back to Brazil. Came back as a theater artist. He also ran for office, did a little work as a politician, but not for long. His real heart was in creating theater and social change. So at the heart of Boal's work is the basic concept that oppression exists in society, and it occurs in a variety of forms. When it happens on a societal level, we talk about it as institutionalized oppression. So we can name the isms, right? Racism, sexism, ageism, classism, heterosexism. We can add in the phobias like homophobia. When we experience it on a personal level, then it becomes something different. And there's the institutionalized, societal, but ultimately it comes down to impact us as individuals. And I'm willing to bet that everyone in this room, regardless of your status in society, your place in it, that on some level you believe that you have faced exploitation, you have faced oppression on some terms, in some ways, and that those moments occur in powerful ways and they shape who we are. So Boal, in his work, he wanted both individuals and society to overcome oppression. But to do that, we have to deal with it publicly. And what better way than theater? So Boal created a whole series of activities in which he empowered audiences to become what he called spect actors. Spectators, but spect actors. Not just passive viewers, but people who could be involved in the action of the work that the actors were performing. So he has something called forum theater, which we're not going to do tonight, in which actors play out scenes in front of an audience, and then they go back and they replay it. But this time the audience can raise their hand and say, "Stop the action." And they can come on stage, tag out an actor, and say, "Okay, we've watched a moment of oppression, of victimization, but I have an idea as the spectator now that we're going to play this scene differently. We're going to see if we can create a solution to the problem. See if we can create a solution." And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. They go back, somebody else comes up as we replay the scene over and over again, empowering the audience to not just be passive spectators, but active participants. And ultimately, in truth, rehearsing ways to change the world around them. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you've witnessed something happening and you feel like you want to step in and help to change that, but you don't know how to do that? And so sometimes you just kind of walk on by and you regret it, but you didn't know what to do in that moment. His theater is designed to help activate spectators to practice and learn. The next time something like that happens, how might you step in? He began his works more simply than that even. He began it with image work. So he did this interesting experiment when he was in Peru and when he was exiled from his native Brazil. He began this exercise by handing out cameras to people. So I'll give you a camera, I'll give you a camera, I'll give you a camera. And I want you to go out and take pictures of whatever you think has exploited you or is a form of oppression in your life or in society. He really wanted them to focus on their individual lives. And there's a famous story that he tells in which he gave a camera to a little boy in Peru. The boy lived in the rural areas, but he would go every day into the city because he was a shoe shine boy, a little 5-year-old boy, and he had to help support his family. So he would go into the cities from the country where he lived, the rural area, and he would shine shoes. Then he would go back to his home and come back in the next day. When he brought back his camera and had the film developed, what was his image of oppression? It was a nail in a wall. The wall asked him, what is this nail in the wall? And he explained, okay, so I live so far from home, I can't carry my shoe shine. It's too heavy, it's too big, so I leave it in the city. And where I leave it, I need it to be safe, so there's a vendor there. That vendor charges me to leave my box there. And I don't earn very much money. I have to pay like half my money just to get the nail, and I leave it there. That is a form, to me, in his mind, of oppression. So that was his image, right? That was his personal image. Boal moves beyond photographs and still images to create more dynamic images. And so we're going to do some exercises here. So he creates image theater. And in these images, we can create stories, even though they may be still, even though they may not be active. Within those stories, within those images, we can create stories of oppression, of victimization, of exploitation, that we begin to identify what's happening in them, and then begin to work towards and talk about solutions. So, Alex, we're going to go ahead and move this over here. We can turn it off. So I want to have some space. Okay. We're going to do an exercise that we do in acting class called machines. Okay? So I'd like to have anybody that would like to volunteer, actually. You can volunteer. I know there's some acting students here who better volunteer. But anybody may. So we're going to create a happiness machine, just to get ourselves going with this, and we're going to explore the theme of happiness. The theme of happiness. So the way the machine exercise works is somebody comes out and starts as if they were part of the machine, a repetitive gesture and sound that captures the theme of happiness. Then somebody else comes out and joins the machine. And then we can have a group of 6 or 7 people doing the happiness machine, and we create through sound and movement and image the notion of happiness. So anybody want to start us off?
Of course. Are you?
Okay? Somebody want to come out and join you? So Addison.
Good job.
Good.
Good job. Good job.
Anybody else want to join? Let's speed up the machine. And let's slow it down. Slow it down. All right. And to a stop. Good. Thank you. Good night. Now we're going to create a different kind of machine. We're going to create a censorship machine. A censorship machine. What would that censorship machine sound and look like? What gestures? And remember, it's not only the act of censoring, but if you're censoring, there are people being censored, right? Or ideas being censored. What would a censorship machine look like?
Oh no! Oh no!
Good.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!
Stop it!
Good.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Oopsie! 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 Stop it!
Nice.
Stop it! Oopsie! 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 Stop
Okay,
it!
so pause, please. So what kinds of censorship do we see happening in this? We have, what's Don doing here? Shame. What's Judy doing?
Stop it!
Not listening.
What's Elite? Okay, not listening. What's happening with Lowen?
Bottom.
And what's happening with Raven over here?
Not speaking.
Not speaking. So we have within this different forms of censorship, right? Self-censorship, right? That's what so through Boal's idea that through entertainment, through theater, through image work, we can create in simple, concrete images the issues that we face, and then it becomes a beginning point for discussion. All right, give them a hand. Okay, so I want to do one more exercise, and this one we're going to create it together. So the subject matter for Standing Strong deals with marriage equality. It's also examining, today we had a really good safe zone training with 25 participants in this space. It's working to impact in positive ways our society with particular issues related to the LGBTQ community and the people who are their allies, and hopefully reaching the people who aren't allies and starting to create change across society. So in his image work, he worked to create stories through still images. So we're going to do that. The subject is homophobia on a campus, on a college campus. Do we think that exists? Yeah. So if we were to create an image on stage, let me have 6 of my actors, 6 or 7 actors. Come on up. Okay. So we're going to start building an image together. So if the subject is homophobia on a campus, on a college campus, let's create first. So anybody have an idea of where we start with this image?
Can I have James and Nick hold hands down the center?
Okay, James and Nick hold hands down the center. Okay. Where do we go with this now? Anybody else? Where do we go? We want to create an image that creates a story of the problem of homophobia on a college campus. Jason?
Can I have Justin over here on one of the sides screaming at them?
Okay.
You
You don't have to actually scream, but yeah. Okay. What else do we want to have happen? Yes, Scott.
Could I have Tina and Mason on the other side of the couple, whispering to one another, sort of behind their back almost?
Okay. And then
You
what
said
else do we
over
want to
here,
do?
Dr. Taylor.
What?
That was kind of it.
Oh.
So what do we want to do with Kate? What do we want to do with Kate? What part of the story does she tell? Yes.
Me?
Yeah.
Can she secretly be crushing on one of the gay people?
Okay.
A lot more than you think.
Okay, so let's tell the story now. So what do we have happening over here with Justin? In his mind, what is he doing in this scene? He's disgusted by a show of public affection. He's not only just disgusted by it, but he's articulating that in an openly verbal way. Perhaps privileged by his own status in society that he can get away with this, right, and not have his behavior disapproved of. Okay, so we have over here. What do you think's happening in this little story over here? Are they approving? Are they disapproving?
Ridicule and gossip.
Ridicule and gossip.
Too afraid to show it for themselves, too afraid to speak out for it.
Okay, and of course we know what we're having here. She is looking at them, perhaps wishing that in her own life she could be openly expressive, or trying to figure out who she is, right? Or what are we missing in this picture? If we want to change this picture to solve the problem, the issue, what do we need to add to it? How do we want to refigure it?
James and Nick, can you hold your hands up like this?
Oh, that was.
What else do we need? Yes, Judy.
I don't know their names. Somebody walking by, smiling and saying hi.
Okay, so let's change this from the gossiping and tittering to to what she said, walking by and smiling and saying hi, being totally accepting and open. So, and we'll freeze it, right? So you can freeze and
Try to high five me.
we still have this problem over here. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with that in everyday life? When you see someone doing that, what do we do with that? Yes.
How about having Tina and Kitten confronting the person yelling?
How do you feel about that?
Confronting? Oh, sorry, I was just making the noise over her call.
So how would we stage that? How would we stage that?
Well, George could just walk over and talk to him and say, stop.
Okay, so go over there. Being an ally, standing up. Okay, so now we've created a totally different stage picture, right? We have the problem as it occurs way too often. We have a possible solution. Now, again, this is baby steps, right? This is the idea that we can't address problems until we start to identify those problems. And we start to empower people to figure out, how do you actually take action when you see something that you don't agree with, that you see an act of oppression, an act of anger and violence. What do you do? So this was Boal's starting off point. And then he moves to forum theater, which becomes more active, it becomes more theater-like with scenes playing out, but also empowering the audience to step forward and take action. All right, give them a hand.
Oh, Mason, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So in the theater and social change class that I teach, we go through the history of theater and social change. We look at different companies, what they're doing. Students research the many examples of social change companies across the United States, to which, if they want to someday work, maybe would apply, go to work for. And we also study the work of Boal. We go through the various steps. Now, this was just, of course, just kind of a thumbnail sketch of some of his works. They're merely beginning steps. And his theater work goes well beyond, of course, what we were doing, but it's the start of the process. We can't create theater that addresses social change issues unless we identify those problems. Okay? And think about where he was doing his theater as well, in non-theatrical spaces. The floors of factories, the schoolyards where children were in the marketplace, where you had a whole variety of audiences who weren't coming in to sit in the comfortable seats, to pay the $15 for a theater seat, but were there looking to change their lives. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned Luis Valdez. I want to end our talk together with his words. Valdez has stated, "The future belongs to those who can imagine it." I love that idea, because in this place where imagination is central to all that we do, in this theater where imagination is central to all we do, it makes perfect sense to me that it is here in the theater that we begin the work of transforming society by imagining the future as we want it to be and as we need it to be. All right, that's the end of my lecture.